In the heart of a bustling African city where the streets pulsed with life, yellow taxis weaved past noisy minibuses, vendors called out over roasted maize and spicy suya, and neon lights flickered against the cracked pavements. There lived a young woman named Amale, tall and radiant, with smooth ebony skin and neatly braided hair, tied back, always dressed in her signature white blouse, with golden Ankara trims, dark-fitted jeans, and polished shoes. The same outfit her three closest friends, Zola Kweisi and Thandi, also wore as a symbol of their unity and support, because Amale was not just a dreamer, but a content creator fighting every day to keep her subscribers entertained and her dream alive. Though her heart had been breaking with every passing week as her Channel ES views began to fall, and one evening, as the orange glow of the city lights poured through her small apartment window and the sounds of car horns rose like a restless chorus below, she stared at her phone in despair, whispering to herself that subscribers were leaving and dreams were fading while her friends sat beside her on the old sofa, their matching clothes glowing faintly in the dim light. And Zola, bold and outspoken, shook her head saying Amale did not need to prove her worth to strangers online because she was already enough. But Amale's eyes were wet with stubborn fire as she stood, her braids swinging, her voice breaking as she declared she needed something unforgettable, something that would make the world watch her again. And suddenly the words spilled out of her trembling lips. "I will stage my own wedding for subscribers." Leaving the room frozen in disbelief as Kweisi almost dropped her tea, Thandi gasped and covered her mouth. And Zola stared in shock, asking if Amale was serious, to which Amale replied with a bitter smile that the world only rewarded spectacle, not honesty, and that she would create the most beautiful wedding anyone had ever seen and stream it live so that brands would finally take her seriously. While her friends argued with her, warning her of the dangers of lies. But in the end, their loyalty outweighed their doubt, and they agreed to stand beside her, their identical outfits turning from symbols of friendship into uniforms of guilt as they prepared for what would become a performance too heavy for their hearts. And in the days that followed, Amale borrowed a gown from her aunt's shop, borrowed rings from a cousin who sold jewelry, and spent her last savings renting a rooftop hall that overlooked the sprawling city, while at night she stood by her window, hearing her late mother's words in her heart. "Truth will carry you further than lies ever can." But she silenced her conscience by scrolling through the endless demands of viewers begging for bigger, louder, more dramatic content, until the day of the staged wedding finally arrived and the rooftop was transformed with fairy lights strung across the rails glowing against the twilight sky, borrowed flowers lining the aisle, and mismatched chairs filled with extras she had hired to clap and cheer like family, and her three friends, each wearing their matching blouses and jeans, walked solemnly behind her as Amale, radiant in her aunt's lace gown, stepped forward with a trembling smile, the cameras capturing every second of the event as thousands of subscribers tuned in live, filling the chat with praise and emojis, their words rushing like fire. "Amale, you are glowing. This is the wedding of the year. We always knew you'd find love." And the hired groom, a handsome model with no history in her life, stood waiting with a smile that was charming but hollow, while Amale's heart pounded with dread as she took his hand and repeated vows she had written at 2 a.m., her voice heavy with fear, promising to walk with him through storms and laugh in the sunlight, and when the officiator asked if she would take him as her husband, Amale swallowed hard and whispered, "I do," the sound of clapping filling the rooftop just as the heavy doors slammed open with a violent crash, silencing the crowd as the cameras swung toward the doorway, where a tall, broad-shouldered figure stood in the shadows, dressed in the same city-style clothes as the guests, but carrying an authority that made every heart stop, and Amale froze, her entire body trembling as her eyes locked on Lwandile, the man she once truly loved, the man who had disappeared years ago when life had grown too heavy, the man she had promised under a mango tree that she would one day marry. And now here he was, his deep voice slicing through the stunned silence, filled with pain and disbelief as he asked why his bride was marrying a stranger. And in that moment, Amali's carefully staged reality cracked like glass. Her friends gasping, the extras whispering, the cameras capturing her shame, while the city below continued as if nothing had changed. The honking cars, the vendors, the neon lights all alive with their rhythm, while on that rooftop, Amali's world collapsed, the weight of her lie unraveling before thousands of watching eyes, leaving her with no escape. The rooftop was silent, the fairy lights flickering in the night breeze, as if even they were unsure whether to keep shining, and Amali stood frozen in her white gown, her lips trembling, her entire body numb, as her eyes locked on Lawandile, the man she had once loved with her whole heart, the man she thought she had lost forever, the man who now stared at her with a mixture of disbelief, pain, and betrayal, while the hired groom shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to continue smiling for the cameras or step aside, and the extras she had paid to act as guests whispered nervously among themselves, their borrowed joy dissolving into confusion, while online thousands of viewers filled the chat with chaos, spamming shocked emojis and questions that Amali could not answer. And in that moment, the weight of her lie pressed on her chest heavier than the gown she wore, and she could no longer hear the city's usual song of honking cars and calling vendors, because all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart and the echo of her mother's words about truth, carrying one further than lies. But Amali could not move, could not speak, until Lawandile stepped forward, his tall frame illuminated by the soft rooftop lights, his deep voice cutting through the air again as he asked if the vows she had just spoken to a stranger were the same vows she once whispered to him under the mango tree, where they had carved their names in the bark and promised forever. And tears burned Amali's eyes as the memory flashed before her. A younger version of herself laughing with him, believing in love that could withstand anything. But here she was now with cameras watching friends silent, and a hired actor holding her hand, and Amali broke her knees weakening as she whispered Lawandile's name, the sound almost swallowed by the city wind. But he heard it, and his expression hardened, not with anger, but with the weight of disappointment deeper than any scream, and Zola, unable to bear the silence, stepped forward, her matching blouse glowing pale in the lights as she told Lawandile that Amali had been desperate, that the world had cornered her into this madness. But Lawandile only shook his head slowly, his voice steady as he said, "Desperation may explain a choice, but it can never justify betrayal." And Amali's tears finally fell, streaking down her cheeks as she dropped the stranger's hand and faced the cameras, her heart racing, because thousands were still watching, expecting joy, not collapse, yet she could no longer pretend. And in a trembling voice, she confessed to the live audience that the wedding was a performance, that the groom was an actor, that the guests were paid, and that she had done it all for subscribers and fame. Her words shattering the illusion she had built as comments exploded with disbelief, anger, heartbreak, and sympathy all at once, while her friends stood by her side, their loyalty unshaken even in the storm, each of them still wearing their identical outfits, their faces heavy with shame, yet their bodies refusing to abandon her. And for a long moment the rooftop was nothing but silence and sobs, the fairy lights swaying above them, until Lawandile, after a pause that felt endless, stepped closer and placed his hand gently on Amali's arm, his voice softer now as he told her that while the lie had broken his heart, he could still see the woman he loved behind the gown and the cameras, and that the truth, no matter how late, was still worth speaking. And Amali collapsed into tears, clinging to the only real thing left in her world, while the fake groom quietly stepped aside, understanding his role in this story was over, and the extras slowly slipped away, their whispers fading into the night, until only Amali, her friends, and Lawandile remained on that rooftop, the city's hum returning as if to remind them that life outside their storm continued, and in that quiet space, Amale swore to never again chase spectacle over truth, promising aloud not just to Lawandile but to herself and to the thousands still watching that she would rebuild her channel, her life, and her name on honesty, not illusions, her voice raw but steady, and though many viewers would leave, those who remained would stay for her realness. And Lawandile, after a long silence, finally nodded and whispered that love could survive even brokenness if both hearts were willing to rebuild, and Amale's friends closed in around her, their identical clothes shining like a reminder of unity that could endure shame and storms, and together under the glowing lights with the city sprawling endlessly beneath them, Amale realized she had not lost everything, because though her lie had crumbled, the truth had given her something deeper, a chance at redemption, at real love, and at content that mattered beyond clicks and numbers. And as the stream finally ended and the rooftop emptied, she stood beside Lawandile and her friends, staring out at the skyline, the city alive with noise and light. And she breathed for the first time in months, without the weight of pretense, whispering into the night that sometimes one must lose the illusion to find the truth. And this time she knew she would never let the truth slip away again.